This is Pop Culture Yearbook. On this show, we pick pieces of pop culture that were important to us in a given year. We then discuss memories and dig into those movies, albums, shows, and more. I'm Brad.
I am Pete.
And I'm Giff.
And we're talking TV tonight. We talked about The Princess Bride, and we talked about George Michael.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And we've got the big one. Thank you, everybody that voted. We had a pretty good turnout. It was a clear winner. We're going to get to Major League later this month, too. That was our audience choice.
Mm-hmm.
But tonight is our TV choice. We all picked Married with Children back in our selection show. And Pete, why don't you tell us what we're going to hear here? Because it's pretty special.
We're about halfway through our fourth season, and it's almost unbelievable to me that we haven't picked this show out yet to do an episode on. I have a lot of memories of watching Married with Children. When it came on, I think we would have been about 11 or 12 years old when it came on the air. And I was in my formative becoming a teenage years, and the sense of humor on the show just hit me perfectly. I watched every single episode, and then I remember it coming on syndication, so it was on like at 10:30 every night after only a couple of years. It wasn't that long before it became a late night syndicated show. So I would watch that as much as I could, and it was one that we could come to school and talk about it with our friends and everything. So I'm very excited about the guests that we have on tonight. I'm excited to talk to. His name is Richard Gurman, who not only was he a writer and producer of many episodes of Married with Children, he also did a whole bunch of other really awesome sitcoms. Laverne and Shirley, Happy Days, Different Strokes, you name it. Worked with some really amazing people like Gary Marshall, really all of the big name stars in comedy. So I'm really excited about this. I do want to also call out, he just released a book in April, and the name of the book, so you should all go out and buy it, is Married with Children versus the World, the inside story of the shock-com that launched Fox and changed TV comedy forever. So it's a really interesting book. I haven't read it yet, but I know Gifford, you and Brad both have. I'm actually waiting for the physical copy that I'll be getting in the mail here, hopefully in the next couple of days. So I'm excited about this interview.
Yeah, and so you talked about this show. It's not a show I watched every episode of, but I watched it a lot. Like when I look back, I watched the show a lot. It was on Sunday nights a lot, and that was like a good time to I'd be doing homework or whatever, and it would be on, and it was in syndication. And so I know a lot of episodes, and I always enjoyed it. It just wasn't one that like I watched it every single week. So it's a great choice, and it's great to go back to, because as I went back, and I mean, I've watched at least 10 episodes in the last 2 days, and I read this book. And it was such a good trip down memory lane, and it's such a unique show that it was really fun to revisit. Because you might, I mean, if you didn't watch it, you probably think it was a dumb show, or, you might have a different opinion of it. But it was really a smart show, and they were doing something that was different from anybody else. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I liked it as a kid. But I also thought, but is it good? Like, the way Al Bundy acts, is it good? But then I grew up and I see Ed O'Neill. He's a great actor. And, like,
yeah,
I look back on it now, like, yeah, it was good. It was its own thing, and it was really fun to go back and watch a lot of and kind of revisit it here. So I'm really excited to talk to this guy too. I really enjoyed his book. I read his book in like a week. It was such a quick read. It's great.
It's a show that kind of makes fun of itself too, which you always love. So,
it's a satire. I love satire.
Exactly. Gifford, how about you?
So this was one that, of course, I didn't get Fox. So I was watching this in syndication once it came out. Like I say, I think it was on, 10:30, 11 or whatever after the news on ABC or CBS. So that's where this show came in for me. I really enjoyed it. Like you say, this came out when we were 11. So I probably started watching this somewhere around like 13, 14, I suppose, maybe. Absolutely, loved Al. Loved all these characters. Of course, 13, 14-year-old me loved Kelly Bundy. And the humor was just so crass and so different from the shows that I did love. I loved Who's the Boss. I loved Growing Pains. Wonder Years is top of my list. I loved watching Doogie Howser. These were the cute little, wrap it up, learn a lesson in 25 minutes, and it was just, wholesome. And then here comes Married with Children, that just smacks you in the face, sticks a hand down your pants on the couch, and you just want to watch TV, you want to watch sports, you want to drink some beer, you want to go to the nudie bar. It's great. I wanted to watch, Eddie Murphy movies. I love what we're talking about next week, Major League. These are R-rated things that a 13-year-old, 14-year-old really wants to get into. At least I did. And this show, obviously, it's on a network television, so it's not R-rated, but it was certainly different than what you're used to.
It's as edgy and as close to R-rated
Yes.
as you're going to find on network TV.
Yep.
And he wrote about it in his book, and we'll ask him about how, there were people who tried to cancel it, and and so there's stories about that he writes about, and I'm sure we'll hear about tonight. You don't want to miss it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk to Richard here after I'm not a book reader. I read this cover to cover, really enjoyed it. It's laid out very, very nice,
Read it fast, too.
very chronologically. It's just kind of goes through the beginning of the show to the end of the show. Very easy for, not the brightest guy in the world like me to read. And just hit on a lot of behind the scenes stuff in this show and the production of the show. So, kind of gets into the meat of it a little bit. There's a lot of interviews with the characters on the show, people behind the scenes at the show. And yeah, it was a great insight into it. So I'm really looking forward to Richard tonight and digging into some of these things.
I do just want to repeat the name of the book one more time. The title is Married with Children versus the World, with the subtitle, The Inside Story of the Shotcom That Launched Fox and Changed TV Comedy Forever. So go out, check the book out, and without further ado, here is the interview. All right. We are very excited to be joined by a gentleman by the name of Richard Gurman, who had a hand in not only the show Married with Children, but many other what I would call Hall of Fame type comedies, including shows like Laverne and Shirley, Happy Days, Different Strokes, Mork and Mindy, and the list just kind of goes on and on. Really, really impressive resume. So, Richard, welcome to Pop Culture Yearbook. We're happy to have you.
It's nice to be here. Thanks.
Yes, exciting. We've been looking forward to this one for quite a while.
Yeah.
So let's just dive right into it, Richard. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background, kind of what led into the career that you chose, and also just kind of some of your pop culture influences that might have influenced your career or your life in general.
Well, when I was growing up, I used to like to watch sitcoms, and so that ultimately was a natural extension of that. I used to like particularly and this is going to date me, but the Phil Silvers Show, You Bet Your Life, Life of Riley, Father Knows Best, My Three Sons. I like the Carol Burnett Show. I love variety shows also. So that was my escape. That was my living room. My family, watched it with my family. So that was me growing up.
Many of those shows, because what do we love on the show, Gifford? What's one thing that we really love?
We love nostalgia.
We love nostalgia. And as we were growing up, we're in a little bit of a younger generation, but many of those shows were still being aired on like Nick at Night. And those were shows that I would look forward to. I know Brad was a big fan of the Brady Bunch and Leave It to Beaver. I think, Brad, didn't you watch Leave It to Beaver a lot?
I throw in a question already just because you brought up all those shows you watched as a kid. So one of the episodes of The Married with Children that I just watched today had Jerry Mathers in it.
Oh,
and
yes.
I was just wondering if it was that like a big deal to you because you liked the show, or was it just, but was that like, did that mean anything to you?
It was just kind of tailor-made for him, but it was a big deal. And actually, this is a little bit obscure because there was a series that was off of Leave It to Beaver called Still the Beaver, which is that went for several years on early, I think it was the Disney Channel early, and it's nowhere in syndication. In fact, the people that are behind it are still looking for, I think there's rights problems, or maybe the videos got destroyed or something. But Jerry Mathers, Tony Dow was in it, Mom was in it, and Lumpy and the whole gang were in it.
Wow.
So I was familiar with the beef.
Yeah.
Can I
Excellent.
follow up? Maybe we're getting ahead here, but since we're on, I just wanted to, so we don't forget about this. So in that episode, like, he really like made fun of himself and like talked about how pathetic his life was. That was the whole shtick in that episode. Was that hard, do you think, to get him to do that, or was that just he was a good teammate for that kind of thing?
I think he was just a good teammate, and I think he understood that's why he was there. Really, I mean, the show is pretty, satirical, and I'm sure he had to read the script ahead of time and had to talk to his agents about it. So yes, he was a good sport about it.
Okay, that's pretty funny.
Well,
So
just to have the Gary Coleman crossed out on the chair that he was supposed to sit on. I mean, it's another shot, at the whole thing. And it was just, it's just great, the amount of good sports that you have on that show that are willing to, maybe take a few shots.
Actually, one of our regulars, Ted McGinley, took shots occasionally.
Oh, sure.
People made fun of his tenure on the Love Boat and on Happy Days, and so he was fair target, and he was a good sport too.
Yeah,
awesome.
I had forgotten that he was on Happy Days. I remember him from Love Boat, but that's right. Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
All right. So talk a little bit about your career. Sort of, we had said that you had a hand in a lot of these sitcoms. Much of that was as a producer and as a writer. And I don't know if there's any other roles that you had in these sitcoms and other shows that you want to talk about. But what sort of led you into that career path?
Well, it's funny because talk about nostalgia. Here's one for you. Mm-hmm. I graduated from the Graduate School of Journalism at UC Berkeley in '73, and I was going to be a documentary filmmaker. And I sent my resume out, and I came to Los Angeles and took a bunch of interviews along the lines of journalistic work. And somebody that I gave my resume to gave my resume to someone that he knew who was producing the Partridge Family. So they wanted to interview me, and they needed an assistant to the producer, and it was the last year of the Partridge Family, and David Cassidy and Shirley Jones and Susan Day and Danny Bonaducci, and they gave me the job right there in the room, and I had to think about it because here I was coming out of Berkeley, and I was going to be a documentary filmmaker and all this, job on the Partridge Family, And so I went back to Berkeley and talked about it with my wife, and I decided to move to Los Angeles with a job rather than move without a job. Right. And I spent a year, and that was actually a transitional year for me. I spent a year working on the stage in the recording studio with the Partridge Family, with David Cassidy and Shirley Jones, and that was my real exposure to sitcoms, and that's what got me interested. So there's a pop culture.
Yes, that is.
No kidding. I would imagine, and sorry if I cut you off there, but I was just going to say, I would imagine in a career like yours, you don't know when that next opportunity is going to come along. So when you have it, you got to jump at it. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking, and I was fascinated by Hollywood. I was fascinated by the product. I met people who I ultimately worked for later. I mean, it was a real networking opportunity, and I sort of never looked back. And so the next job I had, then I did what all aspiring writers, sitcom writers do. I wrote a spec script and sent it around, and I ended up working over at Paramount. Started out on they had an apprenticeship program which was kind of launched by Gary Marshall, and he had apprentice writers. You know, he had a full staff of writers, and he brought along apprentice writers, and they got paid very little, but they were working at the feet of the masters, and they were learning. The sort of the theory that Gary had was you grow your own. You know, they were learning how to do sitcoms in his kind of master class. And I don't know if you know who Lowell Gans and Babalu Mandel are, or Richie Rosenstock. I mean, they're top notch. They went on to write features and so on. But anyway, I was an apprentice in on a show called The Bad News Bears, which was Jack Warden starred in. You guys are bringing out the nostalgia.
Yeah, we love it.
Corey Feldman was one of the Bad News Bears. So there you go. And then from there, I went into the full Gary Marshall camp. I went into working for Laverne and Shirley, and I worked on Happy Days, and and I worked. I mean, Gary wasn't there every minute of every day. He was starting to launch he had a lot of responsibility in a lot of shows, and he was starting to launch his feature career too. But it was just fantastic working. It was a system that was just geared towards, putting out great pop culture, the Fonz and, Penny and Cindy. And, it completely confirmed all my feelings about, how I should, this is what I should do
awesome.
For a living. So it was really, really fun.
Can I ask your early days, you're, like you say, it's a networking opportunity, you're kind of seems like Gary had like a farm system type deal going on where, he's bringing these writers up gradually, letting them see how it's actually done before they're, really thrown to the fire. So in your young days coming in, do you remember your first situation of being starstruck by somebody you happened to be on a show with?
Great question.
I was more starstruck with the stars than with the other writers, and
sure,
the writers were great. Like I say, Lowell Gans and Babalu Mandel, who I don't have their credits handy, but they've written, I think, City Slickers, and they've written a bunch of stuff for Ron Howard, and so I was. The thing about them that was so incredible is, you sit in a room and you pitch out stories, and it's sort of almost as fun as it sounds, although it's hard work. You've got to put out a show every week. And these guys, Lowell Gans and Babalu Mandel, my starstruckness with them, and the same is true with Gary. There's a scene, and Fonzie takes a basketball and he does this, and he throws it through a window, whatever it is, and there's a structure of the scene, and they could spit out the dialogue as if it was just coming out fully formed. I'm sitting there, working to write it, and our job in some weird way was to write what the hell they were saying. And so it was pretty awesome. And then the other thing is, you go to run throughs, so you go to the stage and you just watch these actors. It's like the workshop, Penny and Cindy, or there's a physical bit that they're supposed to do, and they're stuck in a bathtub or whatever kind of Lucy-esque thing it is, and you're watching them do it. So it's just a total immersion, and a job. When the actors go home, part of it, your job starts, because they'll do a run through late in the afternoon, and you'll look at the script, and you'll be down on the set with them, and you'll go through the scenes, and people will make notes and so on and so forth. And then they go home, and you've got this script, and they've got to start again to rehearse the next day. And you've got to take that script, let's say it's 4 or 5 o'clock, and you've got, let's say it stunk, maybe it was great, or parts of it stunk and parts of it was great. And then you've got to take it and do a complete rewrite on it. Sometimes, is this a page 1 rewrite, or is this just a polish? And each week is different. And then so that's the kind of the night shift. And then you're through at 8, 9, 10 o'clock. You're eating out of styrofoam, there. And then it goes, well, now it would just go, someone would push a computer button and it would go into their system. But someone had to retype it, and then had to go to a technology called Mimeo, which is like a halfway printing process. And then someone literally had to deliver it to their house.
Yeah.
Old days here. And then they would come in the next day, and it would start all over again. And that was my life for 30 years probably. Just doing that. But I was certainly starstruck by Gary.
Sure.
And then later on, and I worked with Ron Levitt, who co-created Married with Children, on Laverne and Shirley, and I was starstruck by him too, just in terms of a writer, how he could just organize thoughts and just come out the other side. Whereas at that stage of my career, I just sit down and think it through and outline it and look at it. And these guys, it seemed like they were doing it off the top of their head, but they had a whole computer built in that they were working on.
You kind of touched on one thing that I've always thought would be the most challenging in your line of work is, how do you know if a scene or a script, how well it's going to translate to screen, right? There's been a lot of times where, take Seinfeld, for instance, or any of your shows or whatever, you can find the scripts online and you read it, and just when you're reading it, it just seems kind of dry. But then when you see it acted out, it's hilarious, of course, when you have brilliant acting and brilliant improvisation, all of that sort of stuff. That seems like that would be one of the most difficult aspects of the job.
Well, it is, and that's what I'm starstruck, is people who could recognize that. But the whole multi-camera process, which is sort of no longer in fashion, which was huge at the time, and Married with Children was an enormous part of it, is designed to answer exactly that question, because you get the script, they rehearse it, and then you come and see it, and it's like, let's put on a play, and you come and you see it, and it, depending on egos and so on. On Married with Children, it was pretty open, and if somebody, the amazing thing about the creators of Married with Children, Ron Levitt and Michael Moy, was all they cared about was making that script funnier and better. And they didn't care where the idea came from. So if you're in a group setting and the wardrobe person has an idea, or what, you're at a run through, the guard at the gate, they'll take it. We all have our jobs and our specialties, and some people are more joke people and some people are more structure people. But exactly what you're talking about, you don't know until you actually get on a stage. And then you sort of don't know again until you bring in an audience, and with a multicam audience show, you have an opportunity as a writer producer to be there right on the stage. And if the joke just falls flat with an audience, you usually, the trick is to have 2 or 3 in your pocket, and
oh, sure.
Try this, try that, try the other thing, and but it's a group process, and people say, oh, how about, and then all of a sudden, how about becomes a line, and then all of a sudden that line gets a laugh, and then you're off. Some of the actors hate it. Actually, at first, I write in the book that Ed O'Neill hated it because he was used to the theater and he was used to film, and he hated getting new lines like on the spot. And he tells a story where his wife tells him, you're so sour when you get a new line. The audience is looking at you like you're crazy. They don't expect you to get it perfectly. You're the only one who expects you to get it perfectly. So if you roll with it, you'll do better. And he attributed that little lecture from his wife as to helping him get through the process. But I mean, your question hits on the actual work process of writing a multi-camera sitcom, is that there's a little test. I mean, the downside that where you can fall down on that is if you're sort of just writing for the audience, you're just writing to elicit a response. You don't, quote unquote, earn it. You're just going for the funny word or the funny reaction, and you sort of don't get the build up and the payoff. And that, I mean, that can be a trade-off also. But
Brad, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. It's kind of related to the script and the writing. So we're going to focus mostly on Married with Children, but Pete, you've got the title of his book. It's a long title. Read the title of his book.
Get to that. We are here to talk primarily about Married with Children, although I think we absolutely can talk about the other topics as well. But the reason that we have Richard Gurman on the show is that he has a book that just got released in April of 2024. The book is titled Married with Children versus the World, the Inside Story of the Shock-Com that launched Fox and changed TV comedy forever. And I think that ties into the question I was just going to ask, too, is that a lot of what you talked about is there's that Fox at the time, this was when Married with Children came out when Fox as a station was just launching. And so they really didn't have the rules that a lot of the ABC, NBC, and whatever, they could kind of do whatever they wanted, right? And that allowed for some of the flexibility that you're talking about.
Yeah, there's two sides to that. But yes, you're right. They didn't have the rules exactly, but they also, and this is Fox Entertainment Network we're talking about, not Fox News, which is, right. I mean, it's ownerships and studio and everything. But the thing that set them apart and the thing that really launched Married with Children the way it launched was, at the time, it had been 40 or 50 years before there was a new network. And they decided, we're going to be this new network. And the other thing to remember, talk about nostalgia, is that there was no streaming, very little VCR, very little cable, and so forth. So if you wanted to watch a show on CBS, NBC, or ABC at 8:30, and there was a show on that was on another channel that you also wanted to watch, you had to make a choice. And what Fox said, their mantra, and this was from Barry Diller on down, was that we have to be so different that they're going to choose us. The quote from Barry Diller is that we're going to take the viewer and grab them by the collar and drag them over to our network. So, and there's some, what's kind of curious, and I get into it a little bit in the book, is how much did they love the controversial stuff that we were doing and the nature, of the humor and the toilet humor and the risque humor and the sex humor, or how much did they tolerate it because it fit into that paradigm that I just described, that it would grab the viewer, by the cojones and have them come over. And so their whole thing there, and it was also a big incentive to the people that went to work for them. Ron Levitt and Michael Moy were pretty established showrunners, and they had worked on the Jeffersons and Silver Spoons, and they worked on Happy Days, and they had a lot of credits. So Fox was coming along and not promising to be as rich of an environment as ABC, CBS, or NBC. Who knows how many people would come, and in fact, not that many did come at first. So they went to people like Levitt and Moy, and they said, we will give you freedom, within a certain limitation. We will give you the freedom to create something that is just so different, and so please work for us, because we know you can work for these other people. It's like an expansion NBA team trying to get players to come play in the league with the big boys, and so what you're saying was yes, they could evade the rules a little bit, but they also purposely were mavericks to get people to come and watch them, and then there's a certain point at which beyond which they kind of wouldn't go. But in general, I have to credit them for having this business model that just said, come on down, make your satire, make it work.
I also think that Marriage of Children ushered in a new era of sitcom, in that the early 80s were sort of characterized by Growing Pains, Family Ties, some of those other ones that are the perfect family, the perfect nuclear family. And then you had in the later 80s, early 90s, you had families that weren't so perfect. And I think they related much better. You had Marriage of Children, Roseanne, The Simpsons. And I think that they related better to many people out there, and that's why people switched over, right?
Yes, well, that was the other thing, is that a lot of people, and we would get letters, thank God you're not a perfect family. Thank God we don't have to compare ourselves to you. We're okay too, and it just allowed people to just really enjoy it. And then, like you say, other shows, Family Guy, other shows, Roseanne in particular, picked up that style when they showed that it could be acceptable, and when we broke down a lot of barriers for advertisers too, because we could be you could be successful with raunchier material. It also, if I may spin a little bit, it also sort of created some problems towards the end of our run, where we had a mandate to be different than the other shows, and when the other shows started to be somewhat similar, and we're talking 7, 8, 9 years down the road, we had nowhere to go but to be super crazy, and sometimes we went off the rails. We're still trying to distinguish ourselves from other shows. So, yeah.
I do want to start talking about the book itself a little bit, and then we're also going to talk about the show specifically. But the book that I had mentioned, again, for the listener, is Married with Children, the inside story of the shotgun that launched Fox and changed TV comedy forever. What sort of led to the creation of the book, and how did you draw inspiration for the book itself?
Part of it was that sort of towards the end of my illustrious sitcom career, I started doing some documentaries, and I did one on Bob Hope for PBS, and then I did one on Gary Marshall. And part of that was kind of, that was in a sense a return to journalism for me, and the Gary Marshall one really was very rewarding, and it was payback. I could sort of give back to Gary for all he gave me, and everybody who participated, and Richard Gere and Julia Roberts and Henry Winkler and Ron Howard, they all felt the same way. They all wanted to give back. So the book was done sort of in the same spirit, was to kind of give back. Married with Children gave me a huge career, and made my name, built my resume so I could do other shows, and made me afford a house, and and made me just enjoy going to work every day. And the inside story, I mean, I was privy to it. I was part of it, and I felt that fans would like to know what went on, even when it went off the rails. The craziness. We created this family, the Bundys, and they worked together, and they were just amazing together. And then they sort of went off the rails too. I mean, they had their own issues, as people will in any show that lasts for a long time. So in a certain sense, I didn't set out to do any kind of tabloid-y thing, but the deeper I got into it, the more I felt I sort of had to tell the whole story, and the rivalries, and kind of what went on, and particularly since in this era, everything's out there, or, a lot of stuff is out there on the internet, and I just tried to be true to it and still honor it. And I had huge cooperation from Ed, from Amanda, from everybody, David and Katie, and everybody was really open with me. I just did tons of interviews. I did interviews on the phone, just all the time. And then I drew from source material that's out there, which is fair game. So,
Sure.
So, and then it's funny, a couple of people who are married aficionados with their own websites and with their married fan base thing, felt that, I mean, one of the things that happened at the end of the series was the show got canceled without having a finale.
Yes.
Good news or bad news, there's some pretty horrible series finales. But the fans were really up in arms, and the cast was too. That there wasn't a sense of closure, that and in fact most of the actors found out through second-hand sources. Ed was on vacation, and somebody said, "Oh, I'm sorry about your show," and he said, "What?" And they had heard about it on the radio, and Christina heard about it when she was on doing an interview, as did Katie, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I'm a little off the subject, but yeah, some of the fan base felt that this, and it wasn't completely my intent, but I'm happy that they feel that way, that this gives some closure to the whole experience. So that's part of it.
That's one of the last questions I have written down here that I was going to ask you, but being a writer and having this kind of end the way it did, if you could write the best finale for the show, how do you think it should have ended? What would have been in the finale?
I don't know. It ran out of stories. It's hard. It would have been hard to end it. There's somebody had an idea that they win the lottery or something like that, or I don't have an answer to, and then they blow it. They blow all the money or something like that.
Sure.
It's funny because one of the hallmarks of a sitcom is that things don't change. I mean, you want your character to come back. You're as an audience, you're totally invested in your character being a bully, or being cheap, or being not wanting to have sex with Peg, or Peg not wanting to cook, and so on and so forth. So you don't want an ending to sort of end that. I mean, it's ironic that there was sort of such a pull for an ending, but I'm not sure what that ending would be. And no reboots have. I think there's some legal issues with reboots. I think there were some attempts to do some, and there may be one out there that's an animated one. I know there was some talk of an animated, but which might be a good way to go, because the show got so cartoony anyway that an animated, and then you could freeze the characters in time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But also, maybe it's just best to remember
Yeah.
what we had.
What you had.
Yeah.
But,
Well,
Is
like
there
you
a
say, you
point in the
got-
show?
it's a long way of not answering your question, but I don't really have an answer to it.
I think it's a good answer.
I
Is
think
there a
it is, too.
particular point in the show that you felt like it jumped the shark, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that one of the things, and I talk about this in the book, one of the things that anchored the show was the Steve character, was David Garrison, the neighbor, because what it did was it helped define Al. Steve was this yuppie, Mercedes driving banker guy, who Al had to make somewhat of a peace with because he lived next to him, but it was a target. Al could make fun of who Steve was, and Steve could make fun of Al, and it helped define him. And it sort of contained some of the aggression and it just sort of became a focus for it. When David left completely, Garrison on his own volition, he wanted to get back into theater, which he did, and he did great. And you can almost mark time from it's the fourth to the fifth season to where Al's targets just started becoming the world, and somebody who came into the shoe store, or and some of it was was still great. I mean, his fight against the phone company, or the beer tax, or whatever. I mean, he still was this kind of working man's hero, and but that's when in general, I think the show flew off into jumping the shark, which is the expression.
So yeah,
I realize that you were a writer on Happy Days, so I apologize if you had a role in that episode.
Not in that season, but yes,
okay.
I was certainly, and funny enough, ironically, for your pop culture fans, Happy Days, which is credited with the term jumping the shark, didn't jump the shark when it jumped the shark.
Yep.
It
Right.
lasted another 5 or 6 seasons. But Mary did things like, People from Outer Space, and stuff like that, and and I think we did it well, and we paid it off, and some of it had to do with what I said organically, that Steve left, and it left us a little rudderless in terms of where the humor was going to come from, and some of it is just inherent to any shows that run 6, 7, 8 years. I cite examples in the books of stuff on Cheers and stuff on Taxi that, I mean, we did it a little bit more, and it became almost like it's been described by some as like a Roadrunner cartoon, but and then,
like you said, when you're trying to be the standout, the different from the
Right.
the Cosby Show, like you said in the book, your working title was "We're Not the Cosbys,"
right?
Exactly. And so you have, in the beginning, when everybody is the Cosbys, it's easy for you to stand out. But like you say, as Roseanne comes in and as the Simpsons come in, you guys got to keep going further and further, and you get to be a little more cartoonish, but that's just the nature of the beast. You have to try to keep that splash, keep that shock. And, if you're going to do it for 11 years, you're going to have some pretty outlandish, things on there. So, yeah.
Yeah. What's the expression? Kicks just keep getting harder to find. So, you push the envelope out further, and sometimes still made it was worth it. I mean, Ed and Katie, and they committed to it so deeply, and it was still fun to do, and people still loved it, and
yeah, I think all three of us did as well.
Sometimes that's what actually made the show funnier, though, just because it would go further, and it would get a little bit more I don't want to say cheesy because that sounds downgrading, but that was just sort of what made it funny.
Right.
For the
Where are they
show.
going to go?
Come to mind that were just really outrageous, but one of the best shows or two that we did is Al and Peggy find themselves in a fancy restaurant and they don't have the money to pay the check because the kids have connived the money from them. And so famously, Al's got bad foot odor. So he takes his shoe off and uses it and weaponizes his shoe to get out of the restaurant.
Yeah.
It's there's still a send up of fancy restaurants there. I mean, there's still Al, doing that. The other thing that always cracks me up, and we had it as a running gag, which is really from the moon, is Al going up on the roof to fix something, to install a satellite dish or to fix a hole in the roof, and falling literally on his head, and then getting up and being woozy or whatever, but going back into life as no one would. And I never got tired of that, and I can see by your laughter.
This is great.
Right.
It's just great.
Well, there was one we were talking about before you came on that I just watched today, and Gifford just watched it too. And it kind of brings in maybe the nostalgia factor too, in like the older shows. So they're going to California and they get stuck in this New Mexico town, and there's a gold claim, and I mean it's very cartoony and it's crazy.
Right.
But I also wondered, you're talking about being different. Was that episode, as I'm watching that, I'm a huge fan of the Brady Bunch. Was that episode written as like an homage almost to the Brady Bunch when they went to the Grand Canyon and the guy from Gilligan's Island is there and he's the gold prospector? I wasn't there for 2 or 3 of the years. I was there at the beginning and then all of the end, and that was a year that I wasn't there. So I can't speak to that. I know that's a classic episode. They run out of gas in the middle of the desert or something like that, right?
Yeah,
Well,
I
they
think it was
trade their
Roots.
car in.
And don't they fight over gold?
Yeah, I think it's a 2 or 3 parter. I think it's
It's 2
Route
parts.
666. And
Yeah.
that for sure.
Yeah.
It really stood out as being very cartoony, the acting. But like you said, they're so committed. Like Ted McGinley in that episode, you watch him and he is 100% committed to just this insane way he has to act. And Ed O'Neill always is too. And it's like, so you really talked about jump on the shark knowingly in the book, and like as a writer, it sounds like you just kind of got to give in and you're doing that. But is it hard to get the actors to buy in too when the show kind of changes, or were they all on board?
Yeah, they are and they are. I mean, Ed was started to complain towards the end of the run about it. And I remember I was running the show that year, is the 10th year of the series, and we were on the stage, and there was a joke, and it was some kind of him lusting over somebody, and it was a malaprop or something. I mean, it was some kind of a joke, and we were between takes, and he said, I don't want to do that kind of joke anymore. And I said, well, we don't necessarily want to write them anymore either, but you're Al Bundy. It's not like he got struck by lightning and he changed his personality, which we could do, but you'd always come back to be Al Bundy, So he got a little tired of it. He did towards the end of it, and he started to not only that, and he. I mean, I can say this because he cops to it, and he comes around the other side of it. He started feeling, and this is very common with people on actors on sitcoms for so long. He started feeling he'd never get any other roles, that he would always be typecast as Al Bundy. And guess what? He was on another show for as many seasons. But at the time, and I write about this in the book, he was in a dramatic movie. It must have been on hiatus, and he was playing the part of a court martial, like a lawyer. And they did a test screening for it, and he comes on in the middle of the film, not having been introduced before, and he walks into the courtroom, and the test audience all starts laughing and pointing and saying, "Aha, Al Bundy," and they had to cut him out of the movie and recast it. So he was right in a sense. And then eventually, and then the other thing that happens wherever he goes, people say, Al Bundy, and they put their hand down their pants, and they want him to be Al Bundy in person. And eventually, he was very frank about how he was sorry that he went through a period where he was sort of angry about that and turning his back on his character, and he understood that the audience doesn't know him, as Ed O'Neill, and I mean now they do. He's been in other things. He's just
he's really a brilliant actor. He's really a brilliant actor, and I wonder if at a time that he thought that the Al Bundy role, as successful as it was maybe beneath him a bit. Is that kind of how he started to feel?
I don't think so at first. I think so later, and I do think that his brilliance is in Al Bundy.
Sure. Okay.
The world weariness but yes, I think that he felt that he had other roles to play, and he was friends with David Milch, and there were other fields to conquer that weren't being tapped, because as long as he was with Al Bundy.
That seems natural, because he wrote about, this is one of the longest running sitcoms in history. I mean, after all those years, I think anybody's probably going to start to get a little bit sick of their role, even no matter what type of role it is, and want to try to do other things. So
well, and to go back to Ed being such a great actor, I mean, you have him play this, his role that really broke him into, consciousness with Al Bundy, and plays it forever and plays it great, and then comes into Modern Family playing a character who is eminently successful,
right,
has a wife that he loves, and is infatuated with, he's the consummate family man, wants to always have family dinners, and he's completely believable and plays it so wonderfully. And it's just a testament to him. And then again, like you say, runs just as long, has just as a great of a following, and an amazing show in pop culture. And he's at the heart of both of those.
Yeah. No, it's hats off to Ed O'Neill.
Yeah. Katie Siegel also, I want to bring her up, Peg Bundy, as she was also a brilliant actress in her own right as well, and she is, and so I wonder how she felt, if she felt the same way as Ed O'Neill did towards the end there.
I don't think she did. I think that she really brought this kind of spunk to the character, and in fact, I was just looking back at some interviews that I did with her earlier, and they played. She was written, and Michael Moy gives her credit for this too. She was written more of sort of this couch potato, and which she still kind of was, and loves Oprah and eating bonbons and so on and so forth. But they played her initially. They wrote her as just kind of lazy and slovenly, and she said, I came to the I had my own ideas about it, that she was into herself, that she really liked herself, and that she liked how she walked, and she liked what her appearance was. And she, instead of coming in sweats to the audition, she came in, like pedal pushers, if people know what those are, like capris, I guess. But back then there were pedal pushers, and a cinch belt, and a wig, and she really was taken more with herself, and that stuck, and I think that was fresh, and I think she liked it, and I think at a certain point she felt maybe the show was objectifying women, and she had some issues with that. But then she ultimately said, as several of them have said, it's a role, it's a satire. You're not supposed to be it's like Archie Bunker. You're not supposed to be a bigoted, Archie Bunker.
Mhm.
You're supposed to, bounce off of him, and
Sure,
and that,
sure.
I mean, that maybe a little bit of rationalization there, but you certainly, Al, and I'm changing the subject here, but whatever he did that was offensive, he never won. He always stepped in crap. He always ended up on the losing end of the stick. So it was hard to sort of, he was a hero to a lot of people. A lot of people in the audience went crazy for him, both at home and in our live audience. But he kind of was I don't want to call him a loser, but he kind of ended up on the short end of a lot of sticks.
Mhm.
And you would sympathize with him as a viewer.
Yeah,
And the other
that would
thing
make you pull for him.
Yeah.
And the other thing that he talks about, and he says that Michael and Ron, the creators of the show, were really good about, is that even when he was insulting some woman at the store or whatever, he always got picked on first.
Right.
But, so I mean, there's an expression, the comedy expression, you're punching up instead of punching
Yes.
down.
Yep.
And a lot of that was true. As tough as he was on the customers, he felt that the world was just taking a crap on his head, and to a large extent, it was.
It was.
Mhm. Right.
Being on for so long, so we talked about Ed and Katie, but like the kids, Christina Applegate and David Fought, they started so young, and I'm sure when they start, they're probably happy to have a job and do what they're. As they got older, did they have any objections to the show, especially like Christina Applegate playing this bimbo that's constantly ogled and?
She didn't, and I've heard her say in interviews, and I didn't get to interview her because of what she's going through, but I've heard her say that that it's not. In fact, she used, and I think I quote her, the Archie Bunker analogy. It's not, you're not supposed to take it seriously. You're supposed to see this as a satire. And I never had any, and I was pretty privy. I ran the show one year, but I was also sort of second or third in charge a lot of years. And I never saw her rebel or complain, or, she may have felt, and in retrospect, maybe she was a little sexualized too young, on the show, and probably that wouldn't fly today. One of the things that Michael Moy always points out, one of the creators of the show, was that her sexual reputation, mostly came from Bud talking about her and putting her down. And there are even instances, there are shows where she stands up for herself, and but she certainly wasn't a problem actress, or caused any. She was always there for rehearsal, and she was always there with her lines, and she never said, "Oh, this storyline," and so on and so forth. I mean, certainly, as the series grew, and particularly also when Steve left, we used the kids more, and they had their own thing. Bud has his rapper thing, and Kelly had her Verminator, her sort of career as a actress doing commercials and things like that, and they filled kind of that vacuum. But it really was. They were there to annoy Alan. And in fact, this is a little known fact, but or people who are familiar with the show probably know this, but who are deeply familiar with the show, there were two other kids cast as Bud and Kelly in the original pilot. And what happened was, after we cut the pilot together, those kids just weren't kind of menacing enough. They weren't strong enough. They weren't in the parents' face, and it wasn't just the lines, it was how they were playing it, so that it wasn't funny. Just like with Katie, you couldn't have some pathetic person. I mean, you had to have someone who could stand up to Al, even in an era, before today's, equality kind of, it wasn't before equality, but in any event, those kids were replaced, and David and Christina were brought in, and their parts of the pilot were reshot and then quickly edited in, and because they were stronger, and they got stronger as we went, and they became really good comedy foils for the show, and neither of them, that I know of, really complained about.
I watched an episode today that you're in the opening credits of. It was an early one titled "Have You Driven a Ford Lately?"
Yes, I wrote that.
very much involvement with Marcy and Steve. One thing that stuck out to me, and I remember thinking this at the time, was that Peg and Al, as we said, they're the imperfect family, imperfect couple. Marcy and Steve were there to kind of be the opposite of that. On the surface, they appeared to be the perfect couple, but in actuality, you could tell that they had more problems underneath than Peg and Al did.
And whether they did or not, I mean, they did. But Al and Peg found those problems, and they dug into them.
They would needle them.
That they had, even in the pilot, they come over as this perfect couple, and Al and Peg turn them against each other, so they run out, and then Al and Peg celebrate by going and having sex. So Al and Peg just toy with them, and in that show too, we discover that that Marcy had sex in the back of a car, and Al gives her no end of grief about it, and
right.
And even there they team up to restore this car, but it's still Al's out for himself. Ultimately, there's a fantasy that shows Al passing Steve by, but that's a really good
with the two women in bikinis with him, and then he just drives right by him as he's hitchhiking.
But Al still had some affection for Steve. And yet it wasn't going to stop him from pimping him and from
sure
to turn him against Marcy.
I think
but in the end, it all falls apart for Al in that episode, just like it always does.
Out to be a stolen car.
I think another great example of showing the maybe Steve and Marcy not having everything all put together is episode where the ladies end up in Troy's, which is an exotic male dance club, and Marcy ends up losing her wedding ring down the jockstrap of a male dancer, and the scene where the dancer happens to just stop, it stops over at the Bundys to drop this off, and Al is the one who answers the door, and now he's the one giving this ring back to Steve and giving him all of these things that he should be doing in order, to get out of jail free card, and and at the end when you finally tell her that you give her the ring back, tell her that you got the ring from Al Bundy. He wants to be in the middle of that humiliation for her so badly. It's just what a wonderful scene that is. He's
so joyful that this guy, the stripper, comes and it's got the ring, and then he can just be the devil with Steve, like he is when Steve won't shave his beard, and
after the camping trip, so good.
And that's right. That's how he left too. He became a park ranger, didn't he?
That's established in a way. Interesting that you brought up Troy's, because we established, Peggy goes there, and she, it's a very sitcom device. So I've never been here before. Oh, Miss Bundy, here's your table, and everybody knows your name and so forth. And it's very fun. But the series is one of the foundations of the series is Al at the nudie bar, and this is in, I believe, the second season, and we show that Peggy has been to a strip bar consistently,
right.
Yeah.
And literally goes to one before Al, in the series anyway, ever sets foot in one.
Right. Yeah, she's like Norm walking into Cheers when she goes into Troy's. It's like everybody knows her name.
Exactly.
It's outstanding.
Yeah. No, that's a
So
good.
the show was made to be different from everything. One of the things that I think really stands out that was different about this show is the audience participation and the way that they hoot and holler and get into everything. And I'm wondering, I didn't really look closely. Like, did that start right at the beginning? Was that encouraged by the people running the show? Did it just develop over time? Did
I
you
think it
encourage
must have
it? Did it create
time.
problems?
It
Because
did
I know, like
create
with
problems.
Seinfeld, Kramer,
Yes.
whenever he came, they had to shut that down because it would throw everybody
Yeah.
off. Like, so
It created problems in the timing, because you'd have to wait for the laughs to die down. Even when Al would make an entrance later, not even his first entrance, the hoot and hollering would, and we have to time these things so precisely, to get them, for commercial time and so it did create a problem. But you don't want to tell an audience to not be enthusiastic, I mean, so you wanted that burst, but I mean, you can cut around it, you can cut off of it. One time, and we left this in talking about like the idea of breaking the fourth wall. When after Steve left the show, he would come back for an episode once a year, once or twice a season. And one time when he came back, he got on his entrance was in the third scene or whatever, and he got such a strong ovation. At a certain point, he just broke the fourth wall and he looked on his watch and kind of raised his eye.
That is excellent.
And then we left that in.
Oh my God. I was watching an episode the other day where Jefferson came in, made his entrance, and he actually said the first part of his line twice. Because
I saw one
he
of those
came in
with,
and he started
Pat Dude.
talking, and nobody would be quiet in the audience, so he started his line over again. It's just
Usually we do a retake when
Mhm.
that happens, but that's funny that he would do that. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
But it's a
Yeah,
show
we
that you
did-
can just have fun with as a viewer. You just have fun with it. It's not to be taken seriously, and so it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
was it just a natural thing that the audience got like that, or was it kind
Yeah,
of?
there's warm up. There's a warm up guy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's warm up girls too, but we had a warm up guy, and they keep because between takes there's time and you have to change the set or there's dressing and so on, and they keep them kind of laughing and going. But Married with Children audiences they were just rowdy, to begin with. They were there to see their hero, and we actually got a decent amount of the LA Kings, the hockey team,
yeah.
on their night off. They would come and they'd hoot and holler, and so it was just a real audience participation thing, and we were going for it too. I mean, we played to the audience. It wasn't. I mean, some of the humor was, just really great character humor, and some of it was subtle, but it was a big show.
For sure.
absolutely.
I'd like to talk a little bit about a few of the bullets that were dodged early on in production for this. You covered this in the book. One of the first things is that the way you talked about how Fox would bring people in as far as writers and would be, instead of just getting a pilot, you would be offered 13 episodes.
Right.
Well, when you guys finally finished your casting for Married with Children and settled on Ed as your Al, he was not accepted. Diller, the president, did not want him. So if you were stripped down to just a pilot, back down to like regular show status as far as getting on the air, if that pilot didn't fly and you didn't have Ed O'Neill as Al Bundy, I mean, this show, who knows what would have happened there? I mean, it was awfully close.
Yes, two things along those lines. When they bring everyone in for casting, and then the network, and Barry Diller in this case is sort of the czar, he didn't approve him, and then the studio was given a choice. You could go find someone that Diller will like, or we're going to cut your order from 13 on the air to one pilot with an option for 12 if
Mhm.
Diller
Mhm.
ends up liking him. That was a huge decision for the studio to make, because 13 on the air is like $13 million. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's
Winning the lottery.
it's the gold standard. It's what you, and it's one of the whole reasons to work for Fox was they were going to give you these
Mhm.
commitments. You only get those commitments if you're a big star, if you're Bruce Willis or something like that. So the head of the studio, Glenn Padnick, and he ended up going to Castle Rock, and he actually was under the administration that did Seinfeld, and he was under a lot of pressure from his the other people at the studio to abandon, because there was a time frame. You could have gotten rid of him. I mean, it was hard because we'd seen everybody in town, and we were under some time pressure. And he stood by him, and he took Ron and Michael's pulse on it, and he stood by him, and it really paid off. And the funny thing is that when the book came out, when I had an advanced copy of the book, and I sent it over to Ed, as I did with the other actors, and he read it, and he called me the next morning, and he said, "I knew that Dilla didn't like me, but I had no idea that so much was on the line on that pilot." And I'm glad I didn't, because can you imagine the pressure of going into that night, knowing that the whole production, the other actors, the studio, everybody,
the whole crew,
on Diller liking you, and that was a big moment, and I have to credit Glenn, and and then later Ed told me that Diller came up to him years later and said, I made a mistake about you, and Ed just kind of dryly said, "Well, we all make them."
After the show's a massive success, and
But even though they were the alternative network, I mean, it also shows you that, I mean, there was a power structure, there was a hierarchy, and Barry Diller was a czar, and even though he had this philosophy of doing something different, which is without which we wouldn't exist. He was a big decision maker, and you sort of give him credit, and also I guess it's kind of like old Hollywood, the czars. Yeah. So
well, and then you talked early on too about how this new network is so closely tied to this show, and this show, if it was on another network, probably wouldn't have made it. And because it's on this Fox fledgling network, they're given that latitude in order to get off the ground, and by getting off the ground is able to bring the network along with it. So it's a symbiotic relationship between these two, the show and this network in the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. There's just no way we could have even approached the show on any of the other networks. And I talked to another network executive, Ted Harbert, who was at ABC, and he said they were a little envious of what we did. In fact, specifically and that they wouldn't, their network standards and their people above them wouldn't let them do something different. Specifically, you mentioned the losing the wedding ring down the crotch. They did a show on what's the Tim Allen show?
Home Improvement.
Home Improvement, where the wife loses the wedding ring, I think, down the garbage disposal.
Yep.
So he said he had a little envy that our show losing the wedding ring down a stripper's crotch.
It's a lot more interesting.
A lot more humor than losing it down the garbage disposal.
Yes, for sure. Well, and then go ahead, Pete.
I was just going to say, I think about Fox at that time. they took a lot of big risks, and I think with Married with Children, they seem to have a knack for taking huge risks and having them pay off. I mean, with, like we just said, with Married with Children, and then not long, this probably the success of Married with Children and other similar shows allowed them to spend boatloads of money on NFL, and that's why we have NFL on Fox as the most popular network right now for football. And right. And I'm sure there's others that I'm not even thinking about, but yeah, kudos to Fox back in those days.
Yeah.
Well, and one other bullet I wanted to talk about as far as dodging is one that you spoke about in the book as well. The housewife from Michigan, and her crusade to put this show asunder at, reaching out to your advertisers and saying, well, because that's a brilliant move on her part. If you choke the money, you're going to choke the show.
It was brilliant.
And the whole thing just completely backfired and really brought more brought more eyes to Fox, and really helped to catapult, the show to, a great status.
Yeah,
notorious or not.
I actually talked to her for the book, and she actually was very, very forthright about it. And she saw an episode, and it was kind of a little bawdier than most, but not too much. A lot of it took place in a lingerie shop, so there were women in various states of dress walking around. And so she called. The next day, she called the studio, and in a certain sense, because the studio was so new, they didn't have a PR functionary. They didn't have, sort of a way to handle. So they actually switched her over to the show. So she ended up calling the show, and the show put her on the phone with a woman, Marcy Vosberg, who was a co-writer of the episode. And Marcy said to her, friendly as she could be, I guess, well, she didn't take it as friendly. We look at this as, if you don't like the show, you can change the channel.
Right.
So Terry Ricolto flipped. She just thought that was just really, what a horrible corporate response. And in a certain sense, she wouldn't have gotten that response had she reached the sort of corporate powers that be. They would have known how to massage her. So she took it upon herself to write all, and write to Coca-Cola and Procter and Gamble and all these people, and she called it like softcore pornography. And she got all those people's. She not only got those people's attention, she got the front page of the New York Times. She got the Washington Post. She got Nightline. She got the morning shows. She became viral before there was a viral machine.
Sure.
And the studio and also at the time we were pretty marginal. We were just hanging in there, and so was Fox. And so what Fox's response was they said, well. And some of the advertisers actually pulled out, and they actually apologized to her. And so what happened was, as you said, what ultimately Fox made a decision to change the time slot from 8:30 to 9 o'clock, which was appeasing her. And they also said they would look at episodes more closely, which they sort of did, but sort of didn't. There was one episode that they actually did so much that it became the lost episode, but that's another story. So what happened was nobody knew, what the effect would be, but the accumulated publicity. They say all publicity is good publicity, but isn't necessarily. But people tuned in to see the show that didn't know what the hell the show was. And the good thing is, they stayed watching the show once they found it.
Sure,
they stayed watching it, and so she was, the publicity machine that we almost couldn't get ourselves. And then from then on, the show took off. It just became a hit for Fox. and a legitimate hit on, I mean, never reaching what a Cosby would reach, but getting up there high enough ratings that they and the other thing is that the advertisers had dropped out, came running back because not only they were the ratings were not only better, but it was a better demographic. It was in a group that spends more, a younger demographic that the advertisers covet. So they came back and had to pay inflated rates on top of it. So it was a great iteration. And
that is excellent.
Yeah. So
go ahead, Brad.
I love the whole book. It was such an easy read, but I love that part and how, like, you're doing a great job of explaining it now too, but like, you don't paint her as a villain at all. It's like, she's almost like the hero of the show. It almost sounded like you had a relationship, like her and the show had like a positive relationship in the end where she got you moved and she was fine with that. And the show took off. And it was just this, I love the way you wrote about that. It's a great story.
Yeah, it's interesting. She was very helpful. I mean, she was very, she granted me a very long interview. And she said, in retrospect, if she would be more inclined to get shows to censor themselves about violence than sex, and that all she was a big part of what she was looking for, she got, which is to move the time slot. And she suffered a little bit there. She got threats, she got called names, she got some bad publicity, but anyway, it was interesting. It wasn't just a hero villain. There was some complexity to the relationship. Yeah,
for sure.
Well, hey Richard, I do want to be. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, as far as that episode, when I was watching it, the whole point of that episode is Peg's bra has been discontinued, and Al can't find it anywhere. He's trying to find it, and Steve, there's a knock on the door. Al goes to answer. Steve's there, and Al starts with, "Steve, I need a bra." And Steve right back, dry as could be, and makeup wouldn't hurt either. I thought that was such a great little exchange between those two. I love that little joke that Steve just shoved right back at him.
I do, Richard, want to be respectful of your time, and I want to thank you for coming on the show with us. I think we all had a really wonderful time with this
it was
discussion.
so nice of your agency or whatever to share the book with us, to read it ahead of time. I would highly recommend it if you like the show. Even if you don't watch the show, just if you like TV, I really got into it so quickly, and it's a great fun read. So,
well, really, I want to thank you guys. I've done a number of these, and very few have had people as informed and with as good a questions and follow up as you guys. You guys did a great job, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Very nice.
All right, thank you. Well, maybe we'll have to have you on again sometime.
Yeah,
for sure.
We got more questions. I'm sure we can ask you too.
That would be great. I could go on all night.
I could
part two.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
How fun was that?
Way fun.
That was excellent. I could have talked to Richard about so many more things. I had so many more questions for him.
He had a lot more to talk about, but it was too much in one episode there, and he has his life to get to. So,
well, yeah, we don't want to take up too much of his time, and he was very generous, not only with his time but with his answers. And it was great for him to come on. We really appreciated that.
And by the way, with their books, they're providing us with free digital copies and a free physical copy of the book. So we want to thank them for that.
Great.
Yes, that was very kind.
So
it was easy. It was so great because that way we actually could be prepared. And what a great compliment he gave us.
Right.
Being more prepared than most people he talked to, and with great questions. I feel a little sense of pride, guys.
Oh, I just hurt myself, patting myself on the back. Ow. Ouch.
But yeah, again, it was such a great trip down memory lane, and then to hear some of the inside stuff about it, which you don't get to hear very often on shows that you like. It was really cool, really cool thing. So, loved it.
That's a couple of guests now that we've had, probably maybe 3 or 4 guests that we've had that have really worked with some big shot people, and so now he's going to go around and talk about working with us on our podcast.
More big shot people.
More
yeah.
big shot people.
Yeah.
He's used to it. So all of that prepped him for Pop Culture Yearbook.
Yeah, I was a little surprised he wasn't starstruck at all by us.
By us?
Which, he really did keep his cool quite well, and we appreciate that. So thank you, Richard.
I did think it's so cool too that, I mean, in writing the book, you could have somebody write a book and they just write whatever they want, but like he still has this relationship with so many of the actors, and he was able to actually like talk to them, and so that it's like, I mean, it's a good book and a good account of things, and it's not just some tabloid. And he gets into some of the controversial things, but I wouldn't call any of it like tabloidy, or
no. He's
not exposing anything. He's putting a few things out that are interesting to learn about, but he does it in such a good way that it's just So I'd highly recommend the book. It's really well done.
Yes, it is.
Documented account of how it was and how the show came to be, how important that it was to the network, that it was successful, as well as pulling the cast together. That was a really interesting discussion.
And it really sounded like the cast was like, a family. Like it's a cliche. Yeah. Like the fact that they were on board for so many years, and like, only the one guy left, and he didn't leave because he didn't like the show. He just truly wanted to be in theater. The guy that played Steve.
Right.
Right. But and these kids growing, and you look at how good, like Ed O'Neill with the great stuff he's done. Katie Seagal was she in Shameless, and Christina Applegate, what a career that it's hard to go back and remember that she played this role, because she's been in so many great things, and she's such an awesome actress. I love her. So I like to read that, because it's funny, because the show, it was to be like, it's against the family show and it's against all that. But when you hear the story of the backs, it's almost like they were a family. You know what I mean? It's like they did have that kind of relationship with each other, and that's what made it so successful. So
I'd love to hear stories like that, where the actors are actually the people that you hope them to be, even though that's not necessarily the characters that they play. I always kind of gathered, just watching the show, but I think this a lot of times, and I get disappointed. But you do sense that there's a good chemistry between the cast on this show, and it's great to hear that validated. Because a lot of times you hear that people that you think are great people aren't such great people behind the scenes. But it sounds like that truly is the case with this cast.
Yeah, and it makes me like the show even more. Like like I said in the beginning, it's not a show I watched every episode of, but I always liked it. But like, I look back at it now thinking that show is better than I actually remembered, and maybe I'll watch a lot more of it again too.
Yep.
Hey, what do we got cooking for next week?
Next
week,
we
should take this one.
So we put out the poll, as Brad said earlier. Thank you to everybody who did vote in our audience poll to pick an episode, and we are going to be covering the movie from 1989, one of the greatest years in my opinion in movie history, and that is Major League. So we are going to do a deep dive into that one. We're going to have some fun.
Ricky.
Yeah, we're going to strike this guy out. Yes. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah,
I've seen the movie so many times, but it's been a while since I watched it, and I am really excited to actually sit and closely watch it again.
Yep,
for sure. A lot of fun. Hey,
so good vote. Even though it wasn't the one I put in the vote, good job, good pick, everybody.
Right, and there wasn't a weak option in there. So I mean, no matter what was voted the winner, it would have been awesome no matter what. So
if you base it on the votes, our options were pretty weak.
That's not what I'm saying.
It was a blowout.
I'm just happy that I beat Pete by one vote.
So thanks. Appreciate that.
I got second.
Thanks, everybody. You turned down AC/DC Back in Black. I guess you think it sucks that much.
Oh, stop.
All right. Well, we love our audience.
Yes, we do. And thank you for voting, everyone.
Gifford, do you know what band performs a lot at the nudie bar?
That would be Preacher Row.
That's right.
Here
they are. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, let's rock.
Bye, everybody. Goodbye.
2, 3. No one's here to comfort me. Sorry for what I have done. Sorry that your son is gone. 7 steps and it will be my last. Next time, tell me on my back. I turn and I look to you. I'm scared, but there's nothing I can do. Hang high if you want to.